Hello, friends, family, and neighbors. Thank you so much for all the feedback. I genuinely take it to heart and will strive to improve as much as I possibly can. I'm having a lot of fun creating this little podcast, and I truly hope you are enjoying it too. I do have some news. I'm currently working on launching a companion website. This site will offer more in-depth information about the topics and episodes I cover. You can expect more background details, relevant links, articles, and potentially some listener-submitted backstory content. So keep an eye on that for that coming soon. So for the first batch of episodes, I'm kicking things off by sharing my top 20 horror films of the 80s. Movies that truly influenced me and continue to resonate today. We're going to be discussing number 13 on this list today. Before we dive in, here's a quick reminder of the selection rules. There's 3 rules. First rule is the film must have been released between January 1st, 1980 and December 31st, 1989. Second rule is there can only be one entry per franchise. So that includes series like Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, on and on and on and on. The third rule is similar, but this one is in regards to filmmakers. So to ensure a diverse and interesting list, you can only have one entry per filmmaker. The idea behind this is to ensure some variety among the selections. So, with that out of the way, I want to welcome you to my bloody love letter. The accessibility of the 1980s horror scene, largely fueled by the rise of VHS, was a game changer for young horror fans like myself. It democratized the genre, giving us exposure to films we otherwise wouldn't have encountered. This ability to broaden our horror palette was key. Part of that was the box art. It was critically important then. It had to grab a kid's attention in a sea of options. And naturally, we gravitated towards the covers that looked the most spooky and imaginative. The whole experience of walking up and down the aisles and finding something that you hadn't seen before was almost as thrilling as watching the movie itself. The anticipation on what you could find and discover was exciting for a young, disturbed mind such as myself. So the box art had to compete with each other. And this one had it all together and made you want to watch it. It's not like the cover art was super complex, but it didn't have to be. All it had was an image of some unearthly creature staring back at you. And the image of that alone, well, it was nightmare-inducing. But it was enough for me to pick it up and rent it. When I finally watched this movie, I didn't recognize it at the time, but I do now. I recognized it as a definitive piece of Italian horror cinema. With a bit of camp, for impressionable minds at that age, it was perfect. It hit all the right notes. While it might not appeal to everyone today due to its grossness, for a teenager watching it for the first time, it was exactly what we wanted. Today, we're going to talk about 1986's Demons.
The preview you are about to watch is for a movie that is unlike any you have ever seen before. It is for a movie that goes beyond temporary fear to everlasting terror. It is a movie called demons. Yes, the demons are coming, and they're coming for you. Warning, if you have the courage to see demons, sit near an exit. Otherwise, you might never get out. In your theater, who will survive the touch of the demons, and who will not? Demons. With music by Billy Idol, Mötley Crüe, The Adventures, Rick Springfield, and Saxon. This is no dream. This is happening right now. And it could be happening to you. Demons. They will make cemeteries their cathedrals, and the cities will be your tombs. Will you survive it? Demons.
Though I was alive in 1973, I was pretty young. I was too young to appreciate the film that pretty much changed the horror genre forever. That year, well, that was the year The Exorcist was released. It elevated horror cinema to a whole new level, and it became a massive cultural event that fundamentally reshaped the genre. The movie thrust audiences directly into the terrifying reality of actual demons invading modern everyday life. This phenomenon led to countless imitators, making demons and possessions a common trope in horror that followed. The landscape of possession and demonology horror also shifted one more time in 1981 with the arrival of Sam Raimi's The Evil Dead. This film was another game changer. It introduced a possession narrative that was much more malevolent and a direct assault on the audience's senses. It essentially defined the style of 80s possession stories and solidified the whole cabin in the woods as a major horror trope. It focused intensely on the concept of purely malevolent forces seizing control of human bodies and souls. With its unique Italian horror sensibility, Demons essentially extends the groundwork laid by Sam Raimi in 1981.
Groovy.
Demons was directed by Lamberto Bava. And if that name rings a bell, it should. Lamberto Bava is the son of Mario Bava. And Mario Bava is universally recognized as the godfather of Italian horror. His Gothic masterpieces established the genre's visual language starting primarily in 1960 with Black Sunday, launching an entire industry. And Italy initially was recognized for neorealism, gritty humanist films such as Bicycle Thieves. And at that time, it saw a parallel cinematic movement emerge. Mario Bava, a former cinematographer, essentially became the accidental architect of Italian horror. His film Black Sunday struck with the force of lightning. It was a gothic, sensual, and violent spectacle. It dripped with a Baroque atmosphere, which established that Italy could execute horror uniquely. It was dreamlike and painterly, neurotic, and highly stylized. Bava's work laid the foundation with moody black and white Gothic films, exploring tantalizing supernatural themes and a daring willingness to push cinematic violence beyond the limits American studios would even try to attempt. The late 1960s marked the start of what is considered Italian horror's first golden age. Central to this era is the giallo, Italy's distinct take on the murder mystery. And I am hoping to do some content on giallos after I do this series because that's one of my favorite subgenres, but I digress. This genre quickly became the industry's driving force, and it was defined by signature tropes like sleek black glove killers and hyper stylized cinematography. And there was often a progressive rock soundtrack, all underpinned by this brutal operatic violence. And Dario Argento, another name that you should be familiar with. If not, you will be probably by the end of listening to all my episodes. Dario was the undisputed master of the giallo. He emerged as a superstar in 1970 with his debut, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. I know that's a mouthful. And giallos are notoriously, they're titled, they have these long and colorful titles. And like I said, I digress. But The Bird with the Crystal Plumage set the tone for the 1970s Italian horror. And we had directors such as Mario Bava, again, Sergio Martino, and Luciano Ercoli, amongst many more. They began prolific careers churning out films that blended sex, high fashion, high art, and murder. The giallo genre transformed Italy into a major exporter of exploitation cinema, and critically built the infrastructure, the crews, the studios, even the effects artists that would later fuel the wider horror boom. Italian horror reached its chaotic, blood-splattered zenith in the mid-1970s. That era defines films like Demons. This period saw Dario Argento fully embrace surrealism with masterpieces such as Deep Red and Suspiria, proving that horror could be artistic and operatic and dreamlike. Lucio Fulci, known as the godfather of gore, he underwent a creative transformation around 1979, igniting this whole Italian horror movement of the 80s. And I discussed him in the very first episode of My Bloody Love Letter. In 1979, he released Zombie, also known as Zombie 2, in Italy, which served as a provocative challenge to the existing zombie genre. Fulci's filmography, which includes the movies like City of the Living Dead and The House by the Cemetery, and Beyond, which was the film I covered in that first episode. It's characterized by a style that can be summarized as surrealism meeting grindhouse. He favored imposing dream logic over traditional narrative structure, often filling his movies with unsettling elements like maggots, eyeballs, running corpses, and grotesque oozing zombies. While American critics often disliked this approach, horror fans embraced and adored his distinctive style. As the 1980s began, Italian horror underwent a shift. It embraced a style of apocalyptic terror. This new wave often featured demons and zombies, the rise of the dead, plagues, curses, and themes of urban decay. The world was portrayed as ending in ways that were deeply confusing yet undeniably awesome. Demons is a prime example of this movement. It marks the moment when Italian horror transformed into this loud, messy, stylish, and bloody party. Italian horror cinema, particularly during the 80s, established a distinctive aesthetic. Its foundations were built upon elements like stunning practical gore and pioneering makeup effects. These visuals were frequently paired with synthesizer-heavy scores, often featuring bands such as Goblin. The look of these films was distinctive, frequently utilizing neon lights and smoke and surreal lighting. Even lower-budget productions achieved a remarkably unique visual style, often incorporating unbelievably daring stunt work. Lamberto Bava offers a comprehensive exploration, including every conceivably gory detail of 80s Italian horror with demons. Now is the time in our podcast to talk about the plot. Spoiler warning if you haven't seen this movie. Thank you for holding. One of the things about Italian horror that you can say is that plot isn't always the most important element, but we'll try to unravel the plot of Demons. The plot begins on a Berlin subway where we have Cheryl and a friend being approached by a strange man in a half-face mask who gives them a couple of tickets, golden tickets nonetheless, for a free screening at the Metropolitan Theater. It's actually Metropole, sorry. It's the Metropole Theater, which they accept. As the audience gathers, we are introduced to the main group of characters. We have a blind man and his guide. We have a pimp named Tony with his two prostitutes named Rosemary and Betty. We have a married couple. And we also have our eventual heroes, George and Ken. In the theater lobby, there's an unsettling display featuring a demonic motorcycle and a metal mask. Rosemary, one of the prostitutes, playfully tries on the mask. And in doing so, she scratches her cheek on a sharp edge. She laughs it off, but the wound begins to bleed. The movie, we're talking about the movie within the movie, the one on the screen at the Metropole Theater. It starts. It's a horror movie about 4 teenagers who discover the tomb of Nostradamus. On screen, the teenagers find a mask identical to the one in the lobby. And one of them puts it on and gets scratched. Interesting. Meanwhile, Rosemary starts to feel sick and heads to the bathroom. The scratch on her cheek begins to throb ominously. What follows is a gruesome transformation. We have Rosemary turning into spoiler alert, a demon. Claws begin to grow, teeth begin to sharpen, and a goopy green ooze leaks from her face before she attacks her friend Betty. Poor Betty. In the second act, we got some action. It starts to escalate as the wounded and transforming Betty stumbles into the theater auditorium, and in a great sequence, she falls through and tears open the movie screen. The audience initially mistakes this for a special effect, and they even applaud until she starts attacking the blind man, gouging out his eyes, which is, interesting. Realizing the danger, the audience rushes for the exits, only to find the doors bricked up, trapping them inside the theater. We learn that the transformation is rapid, and, after you get a scratch or a bite, things begin to... It doesn't take days, put it that way. It happens very fast. The infected are not mindless zombies. So remember, even though they sort of have some characteristics of zombies, they're not. They're demons, okay? It's in the title. And these demons, they're fast, they're strong, and they have some intelligence going on. So now we got the survivors retreating to this balcony, barricading the doors. And at the same time, outside, we got 4 young punks. And you know how we know they're punks? Because they're snorting cocaine in a car, attempting to evade the police by breaking into the Metropole Theater through the back door. And this offers a fleeting moment of hope. But by forcing the door, they inadvertently allow the demons access to the outside alley before the door seals again. Sadly, these 4 young men, these punks, if you will, are quickly slaughtered, adding to the ranks of the growing army of demons. Now we got the third act, and this is where things really pick up. So we got the film's most iconic sequence featuring demons reaching the balcony. And this prompts George, one of the previously mild-mannered heroes, to take a stand. He finds a real motorcycle and a katana in the library. Now, it's not a library, it's a lobby. So that's on me. It's a lobby. It's a library in the theater. It's Italy. Who knows? George then rides the motorcycle up and down the theater aisle, using the sword to slice the attacking demons in half, with Cheryl riding on the back. Meanwhile, a few of the remaining survivors climb to the roof, only to discover that too is sealed. Suddenly, a helicopter crashes through the ceiling. Now, I told you it really amps up here. And we got Cheryl and George quickly using the winch that's on the helicopter and the grapple hook to ascend out of the theater, narrowly escaping as the horde of demons swarms the area. During their escape, they manage to kill the mysterious masked man from the subway, who is revealed to be again, spoiler alert, a demon. In the film, about 2/3 of the runtime effectively leverages this whole claustrophobic setting to create an atmosphere of creepiness and spookiness. However, once this motorcycle becomes a central element, the movie does have a tonal shift, a dramatic one. It transforms into an action horror film, largely abandoning its attempts at being scary in favor of spectacle and impressive stunt work. The 80s Italian horror genre, as noted, it frequently featured themes of the apocalypse and apocalyptic conclusions. A notable example is when Cheryl and George escape the immediate terror of the theater and get onto the roof and ultimately down to the street. Their expectation of safety is immediately shattered as they discover that the city itself is in chaos. The infection has spread, and the city is literally burning. A Jeep pulls up beside them. Sorry, I'm just trying to remember this next plot point. The Jeep pulls up beside them and picks them up, a very nice group of people, and drives them out of the city and towards the woods, seemingly to safety. The film offers one final significant moment. And I wouldn't call it a twist because I think you might see it coming, but I'll refrain from describing it anyways, as the plot is, well, I don't want to get into. It's a treat. I don't know. I liked it, but it's not a big deal. So maybe I'm making more out of it. So I'll just shut up. Yeah. So that's the plot, such as it is, of Demons. If it doesn't sound awesome, trust me, it's awesome. If it does sound awesome, trust me, it's awesome. It's a treat to behold. So anyways, that's the plot. Now you're up to speed.
Now is the time in our podcast to talk about the cast and crew, the names behind the on-screen magic. Thank you for continuing to hold.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about Lamberto Bava. And he was born in Rome, which is a little town in Italy. And he was the scion of a cinematic dynasty, really. He represented the third generation of Italian filmmakers, following his grandfather, Eugenio Bava, who was a cameraman and optical effects artist during the early silent film era of Italy. This family connection is crucial because Lamberto wasn't merely the son of a famous director. He was born into a legacy that spanned from silent cinema all the way through the golden age of Italian horror movies. And carrying this legacy Lamberto entered the film industry under the tutelage of his own father, Mario Bava, an icon both in Italy as well as around the world. He began as his father's personal assistant on the film Planet of the Vampires, which came out in 1965, and he gained experience. Mario eventually promoted him to assistant director for a few of his films. And from about the mid-60s to the late 70s, Lamberto worked closely with his father, a collaboration that cultivated classic movies like, well, again, Planet of the Vampires, Danger Diabolic. I don't know if I'm saying it's Diabolic. Danger Diabolic, a quintessential Bava film, really. I wish I knew how to say it the first time properly. And a later 70s horror film called Shock. Shock is notable because it was Mario Bava's final theatrical film. It represents a deeply personal and pivotal moment for his son Lamberto. Mario, whose health was declining, often exaggerated his illness as a way to allow Lamberto to direct certain scenes uncredited. This was Mario's method of giving Lamberto valuable hands-on experience. Mario was planning to leave the set early and officially handed over the directorial duties to his son. While he claimed this was due to his increasing health issues, it was widely rumored that his true motivation was to give Lamberto the opportunity to step into the director's role. This transfer of responsibility was a key moment in the Bava family legacy. Some estimates suggest Lamberto Bava directed about 25% of Shock, making the film a touching passing of the torch from father to son, really underscoring the generosity of Mario Bava. Lamberto's formal debut as a director occurred in late '79 with the film Macabre. The movie was reportedly inspired by a true incident in New Orleans involving a woman who kept her lover's severed head in a freezer. According to Lamberto, the project began unexpectedly when the producer approached him to write and direct the film. Lamberto completed the writing and directing of Macabre in just 6 weeks. Upon seeing Macabre, Mario Bava allegedly told his son that the torch had been passed and that he could now die in peace. Kind of a powerful story. It suggests a father's acceptance of his son's legacy. Now, when Macabre was released in February of 1980, it received a mixed reception and did not become a global sensation. It did earn Lamberto some crucial recognition, especially from his father. Tragically, just 2 months after the film's Italian premiere, Mario Bava passed away, marking the end of an era in Italian horror and filmmaking. The narrative of a father passing on his legacy to his son before his death is profoundly dramatic and touching. At the age of 36, Lamberto finally stepped out of his great father's shadow, though this milestone was simultaneously accompanied by the immense loss of his father. Because Macabre was not a major commercial success, though, Lamberto temporarily returned to assistant directing. Following his father's passing and the poor performance of Macabre, Lamberto felt compelled to reestablish himself in the early 80s, working outside of his father's considerable shadow. During this period, he took on various jobs while searching for his identity in cinema. His work included serving as an assistant director under Ruggero Deodato on the infamous Cannibal Holocaust. He collaborated with Dario Argento on the amazing Tenebrae. He directed a film called A Blade in the Dark, which was initially developed as a very low-budget, 4-part, 25-minute TV project. And he also directed a couple non-horror films. There was an action movie called Blast Fighter and a sci-fi movie called Monster Shark. Lamberto was dabbling around during this time. He was pretty much just taking whatever employment he could to find his voice. And then Demons happened. The production for the film Demons utilized the former Metropole Cinema in West Berlin's Schöneberg district. This theater was largely used for the film, and it provided an authentic, somewhat dilapidated look that helped establish the story's atmosphere. The building that served as the exterior of the Metropole Theater is still standing in Berlin. It's now a club called Goya. Due to its fame from the film, it has hosted a few horror conventions. In 1985, during the Cold War, Berlin was still divided by the standing Berlin Wall. The creators chose to film the demon outbreak in a city already split down the middle, with filming taking place in both Germany and Italy. As referenced in the film, country cinema posters for Werner Herzog's Nosferatu the Vampire and Dario Argento's Four Flies on Grey Velvet can be seen hanging in the theater lobby. Principal photography for the film spanned about 9 weeks in June and July of 1985. And despite the extensive use of practical effects, shooting the entire feature in this time frame was considered a fast production turnaround, even by the standards of the time. Filming took place across 2 primary locations. It was West Berlin, and this is where most of the exterior shots took place, primarily of the Metropolitan Cinema, the subway sequences, and most of the street scenes that were filmed. And for the second location, it was filmed in Rome, and this location was used for all, if not most, of the interior scenes. The special effects work, including the, managing all this chaos of the practical effects and the stunts, was done here, and it benefited from the controlled environment of the studio. Doing the effects for this was Sergio Stivoletti, and he was one of the main stars, really, of the movie. He served as the lead special effects artist, this being only his second film in that role. Stivoletti had previously collaborated with renowned Italian directors such as Argento and Michele Soavi, Lamberto Bava, and Gabriele Salvatores. Lamberto Bava gave Stivoletti a clear directive: go nuts, go gonzo, with all the gore and the disgusting special effects. And the budget did limit the quality of the practical and makeup effects, but I feel like they successfully achieved their goal of grossing out the audience. And examples of these effects include the revolting pustules and grotesque pus. But the transformation of the demons was particularly gruesome. We had the claws split human fingernails, and the demon teeth pushed out human teeth, showing the displacement within the gums. And while the monsters didn't look completely realistic, they didn't look entirely fake either, creating an unsettling quality to help the film get under your skin. Another notable effect is the backburster, a demon that erupts from the character Kathy's back. This creature is independent of its human host and bears a striking resemblance to the metal mask seen in the theater lobby at the beginning of the film. But the most memorable effect, however, was also the simplest: the demon's glowing eyes. Bava conceived this idea on set while filming a scene where demons approach the camera. The effect was achieved by having the actors wear refractive paper. And the iconic moment where demons shamble up the stairs and have their glowing eyes was inspired by Sergio Stivoletti, who liked a similar effect in the movie The Company of Wolves, which was filmed by Neil Jordan. For those familiar with Italian horror, the name Michele Soavi is likely recognizable. Soavi would go on to direct notable Italian horror films like The Church and probably his most famous film, Cemetery Man. He was also Argento's protege. In this film, Soavi served multiple roles. He's primarily played two characters, but best known as the man in the mask who handed out the tickets, and another character who went by the name of Jerry. And also should be noted that Soavi directed the film within a film sequence. So the movie about the Nostradamus was filmed by Soavi. And as Argento's assistant director on several projects, Soavi was a devotee of his work. This connection illustrates the collaborative nature within the Italian horror community, as Soavi also served as an assistant director on Demons. And we should also talk about the cinematography, which was done by Gian Lorenzo Battaglia. And using his approach, he used this claustrophobic lighting and dynamic handheld camera work. And that was key to creating the film's sense of being trapped. This feeling was intensified by the chaotic crowd sequences. It depicted this rapid, demonic spread of possession. And a significant logistical hurdle was coordinating the large-scale transformation scenes when it kind of relied on the practical effects alone, the gore and the prosthetics. Everything had to be synchronized with the action and executed perfectly in camera because there was no reliance on CGI. There was no safety net. Any failure in the practical effects meant a complete reset of the scene and the effects and the prosthetics. This commitment to practical effects was essential for maintaining the film's relentless pace, and it minimized post-production work. As mentioned earlier, Argento is, almost as much as Mario Bava, had his fingerprints on this film as well. He was and is an iconic figure in the horror genre, and he had a significant presence throughout the production. His unique visual style is really evident on screen, and it blended the styles of the director and kind of his style as well as Mario Bava's style. This combination resulted in a film saturated with vibrant, almost psychedelic colors that were highly characteristic of this mid-80s aesthetic. Furthermore, the film was something of a family project, as Argento's daughter, Fiore, played the character of Hannah. And Fiore was quite the trooper. She had to endure a considerable amount of demonic slime during this whole shoot. So there you go. Argento was fresh off the success of his film Phenomena, which came out in 1985. And this was a film that actually starred a really young Jennifer Connelly. And Dario was beginning to desire to produce more films. And he had a previous producer role in Dawn of the Dead. So he kind of wanted to do a bit more in that realm. And so he began looking around for some projects to get himself involved. And he began initially by reading a script that was a science fiction base that he wasn't really sold on. And then he began meeting with Mario. Sorry, it was Mario, not Lamberto, who agreed to produce the film. So Argento brought in some of his influence, and which meant bringing in some of the people that he's collaborated with before on his films. People like Claudio Simonetti, who helped with the score. And, like I said, his visual style is really all over the film. You had reds and blues, which are, kind of a hallmark of peak Argento. So, especially in films like Suspiria. But despite all this, collaborative energy that went into this, there were some challenges in production. One of the challenges was around the script. The initial concept involved writers presenting their script to producer Fabrizio De Angelis. And De Angelis intended to save time and money by utilizing pre-existing film clips from some of Lucio Fulci's early works. And these clips were meant to be the film within a film shown at the Metropole Theater. Argento joined the project and brought in Franco Ferrini to complete the script. This move caused quite a bit of tension with one of the original co-writers, who went by the name of, still does, I guess, Dardano Sacchetti. I'm really challenging myself with trying to pronounce these Italian names properly. I hope I'm doing them justice.
Signori, questo è un vecchio amico mio, Colonnello Hans Landa della SS.
Buongiorno.
Signori, è un piacere. Gli amici della vedetta ammirata da tutti noi, questa gemma propria della nostra cultura, saranno naturalmente accolti sotto la mia protezione per la durata del loro soggiorno.
Grazie.
Anyways, Sacchetti didn't really appreciate Argento bringing in his guy Franco to help complete the script. He outright objected for a lot of these changes. Sacchetti stated that he was paid and asked to leave the project, but was later brought back in for a final script polish. His contribution was delaying the demons' appearance. They showed up much earlier in the original screenplay. Introducing them later, he believed, helped build more tension before all the chaos started to unravel. And another writer later commented that the film's first half closely resembled the original script, while the second half, which was pretty much Franco Ferrini's work, Argento's guy, the second half featured significantly more blood and gore and special effects. It was felt by some that the structure was a little bit of a tonal shift that was a little too dramatic, but I feel I liked it. I liked how dramatically it changed at that point too, but you can definitely see the different styles and the different influences of the writers from the first half to the second half of the film. Now, the cast was an international cast, obviously. We had an actor who is Urbano Barberini. Sorry, I do have to read these names, by the way. So if it sounds like I'm reading it, it's because I am. Urbano Barberini played George. Tasha Hubby played Cheryl. And Bobby Rhodes played Tony the Pimp. Also, we had Nicoletta Elmi, who portrays the usherette, is notable for some small roles that she had in Dario's movies Deep Red and the Mario Bava film A Bay of Blood, which it's probably been stolen by Friday the 13th. So if you watch Bay of Blood, you will notice that it looks a lot like the first Friday the 13th. A common criticism, especially from North American audiences, well, I guess other countries outside of Italy, but it was perceived that there was poor quality of the acting in Demons. And this is probably attributable to the dubbing process, given this diverse and international cast, including Italian and German performers. Using English voice actors for the dubbing may have created a disconnect and contributed to the awkwardness of the performances. But it should be noted that the production timeline for the film was remarkably efficient, with principal photography completed in just 9 weeks during June and July of 1985. The entire project operated on a modest budget of approximately $1.8 million. What makes this particularly impressive is the scope of the shoot. It spanned 2 countries, Rome and West Berlin, Germany, and required that all practical effects and location shots be achieved within that strict 9-week filming window. Domestically, the film performed well, grossing about 1.25 billion Italian lira, which, while difficult to translate into a modern figure, it does seem like that was quite a bit of money. I do have to give some due credit here to the film's score, and this was composed by Claudio Simonetti, which I mentioned before, a collaborator with Dario, and it deserves discussion before moving on to the soundtrack. So Simonetti, a founding keyboardist for the band Goblin, brought a distinctive sound to the project. Goblin is well known for scoring numerous Italian genre films, most famously collaborating with Dario Argento on films like Tenebrae and Deep Red. And perhaps most notably, the one I'm most familiar with him doing, or I guess Goblin doing, is Suspiria. And for those of you out there that are George Romero fans, they also scored the 1978 original Dawn of the Dead. By 1985, when Demons was made, the band Goblin had essentially dissolved, but Simonetti continued his solo work, retaining the band's musical DNA. The score for Demons features a heavily synthesized Italian disco sound. It's quintessential mid-80s horror with propulsive drum machines and sequencers. In this sense, Simonetti served as kind of a John Carpenter for Italian horror. The main theme, Demon, starts with breakbeats and a drum machine-driven disco rhythms before descending into a riff featuring a pipe organ. Simonetti masterfully takes danceable disco rhythms and distorts them into something more sinister and evil sounding. This music works powerfully with the visuals, definitely elevating the film. And while atmospheric, the score is also relentless, with a propulsive energy that brilliantly builds suspense. It gives the film a glossy MTV generation aesthetic, albeit a somewhat darker one. Of all the scores Simonetti composed after leading Goblin, his work on Demons holds a special significance. Even now, the score holds up pretty well, despite its distinctly 80s sound. And as a rock and roll fan in the mid-1980s, the soundtrack definitely made me a fan of the film. It featured a mix of hard rock, including Mötley Crüe, Billy Idol, Saxon, and Scorpions, along with other artists like Rick Springfield and that huge band Go West. However, for me, the best song on the soundtrack, and certainly my favorite in the movie, is Accept's Fast as a Shark. This track plays during the motorbike scene where George, wielding a samurai sword, cuts down the various possessed demons. That moment is, to me, the highlight of the film, both musically and visually. The soundtrack is a significant part of the movie's identity, and if you somehow weren't sure it was an 80s film before that point, there's not much more I can tell you. Demons is self-aware. It knows what it is. And it doesn't take itself too seriously. Sort of in the same vein as The Evil Dead, it employs a meta-narrative style, which becomes clearer in retrospect. The film literally realizes the metaphor of a movie's impact, showing on screen the demons breaking through the film and attacking the theater audience. This wasn't just a horror movie set in a theater. The film's screen served as a portal. And one can interpret this as a representation of on-screen violence spilling out into the real world. Though not a subtle correlation, the film's release coincided with the height of the Satanic Panic in the US. The PMRC hearings happening around that time in '85, as well as the Filthy 15 list, which the PMRC compiled for their great contribution to society. It should also be noted that the Video Nasties panic in the UK did contribute a lot to this as well. I don't recall if this is on the Video Nasties list. I should have researched that, but here we are. I'd be surprised if it wasn't on the list, but again, who knows? There were others that were, I would think, nastier at the time. I digress. Once more, I digress. The idea is that Demons kind of acts as a satire of a society waging war against entertainment. And it's a culture it didn't understand, wanting to blame, the ills of society. And it really wanted to suppress all that. The film's incorporation of a metal-tinged soundtrack reinforces the satirical stance. It features the very type of music, music representing sex, drugs, and rebellion that society was attempting to suppress in media like MTV, film, music, and radio. The film embraces a no-rules approach. It features seemingly unjustified on-screen violence. This appears to be a deliberate celebration of the very elements conservative groups have historically opposed in the genre. It's violence for the sake of violence. It's tasteless, absurd, and like I said, fully self-aware. This disregard for conventional morality while being an outrageous element is a character. It's part of the appeal, and it's key to its effect. The film's intentional awareness of its own absurdity, it's somewhat reminiscent of a violent Wile E. Coyote film, only it's Italian horror. It's kind of what makes it work. The lack of sentimentality or emotional attachment to the characters gives the narrative a blunt edge. The subtext is clear. This is what you came for. There's no moral lesson, no final girl. No one learns anything. There's just chaos. And unlike most North American films that typically conclude with a sense of hope, suggesting our protagonists will survive and escape, this film offers a more nihilistic ending. As our heroes George and Cheryl venture into the broader parts of Berlin, they quickly realize that chaos reigns outside the theater as well. The demonic possessions have spread throughout the city. Initially, it seems like they might make it to safety as they drive out of the city, providing a moment of hope. However, the ending, which I hinted at earlier, and you can likely guess, reveals the grim truth. The so-called stinger at the end of the film confirms that this wasn't just about surviving a single night's escapades in a theater. It was, in fact, the end of the world. The apocalypse. So there you have it. Demons, number 13 on my list of influential 80s horror films. It stands out as a straight-up horror movie. Like many of the other films I've picked, this one is unapologetic and it embraces its genre. As I've said before, it knows exactly what it is. As a teenager, this was one of those films that you just had to see. I know it's not for everyone. It doesn't offer profound psychological depth. While it does have atmosphere, that's not its main goal. This movie is determined to go to 11, and the sheer chaotic craziness is part of the fun. The experience is all about diving in, getting grossed out, feeling the tension, and then getting out, safe at home. In my case, I was safe watching it on my VCR, even though the film itself is apocalyptic. One of the other major draws for me is that I always appreciate a film that gives a metaphorical middle finger to sanctimonious groups who are often barking up the wrong tree and looking for scapegoats for the ills of society. Demons has that punk rock attitude, and metal attitude for that matter, since music is more metal than punk. It gives a definitive FU to the man and society, which is always fun and kind of necessary. Though it's not as widely recognized at the time as some other films, perhaps because it is Italian. I commend European audiences for being savvier and more ahead of the curve in understanding the difference between film/art, which I consider this to be, and the simplistic cause and effect analysis that simple-minded people often attribute to horror. If that's a judgment, so be it. The film is definitively 80s, which adds to its charm. Many films on this list could belong to any decade, but Demons screams 1980s, and it knows it. As someone who grew up during that time, looking back gives me real fondness for that era, and where I was back then. So, if you have the appetite, literally and figuratively, this kind of film, I highly recommend checking it out. Should mention that the sequel Demons 2 is also pretty darn good. You could do much worse than watching Demons 1 and 2 back to back for a double feature. But I suppose that just says a lot about what I consider fun. Thank you once again to the literal dozens of you who have listened to this podcast and everything I've put out so far. I truly appreciate you. You indulge me and let me talk your ear off about all things 80s. Sorry. I hope it gives you something to maybe add to your watch list, especially if you're into horror. If not, perhaps it offers some insight into somewhat quirky mind, I would like to think, and what I find entertaining. But it's all good fun at the end of the day. I do genuinely appreciate all of you. Special dedication goes to my beautiful and amazing wife, as always. She is my inspiration for getting this podcast up and running. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. I love you. This has been my bloody love letter. And please remember that love is eternal, and so is the immense amount of time it takes to produce every episode of this podcast.